Seattle's distinctive skyline is changing quickly.
Architects are testing the limits of what they can build and adding a new level of flair to the city's silhouette. King 5's Ted Land looked into how those blueprints are becoming Seattle's next building.
And those architects are trying some pretty bold designs here in Seattle, like this new glass tower just over my shoulder. They're trying to make an impression in this city. City planners, meanwhile, have a pretty difficult task. They're trying to protect this distinctive skyline as it attracts attention from developers around the world.
It's just been a fast-track building boom the last 10 years, I think.
From his perch at Gasworks Park, Isaac Morgenstern is trying to keep up with the latest developments.
I just have mixed feelings about the quick changes.
Over the past 61 years, he's seen Seattle's skyline rise and expand. For much of the 20th century, the Smith Tower was the skyline. Once the tallest building west of the Mississippi River, it started getting some company in the 60s. The Space Needle became the highlight, but was quickly joined by other high-rises. This was the view from Gasworks Park in 1975. 10 years later, the city grew even taller. Consider this perspective from West Seattle in the 80s. Here's what that looks like now. By the millennium, Seattle had grown into a major city with a distinct skyline. And it continues to evolve today. All those gaps are filling in with bold expressions of concrete, steel, and glass.
I've always been curious how they sit down and like you say, envision what they want it to look like aside from just a big blob of buildings.
Architects have quite a bit of room to flex their creative muscles in Seattle, and they're doing just that. One of the newest additions to the skyline is the sleek 43-story F5 tower, which is nearly complete.
All aboard! It's like Six Flags, you know.
The team constructing the skyscraper took me up to the top this spring to explain the thinking behind the design and how it fits into the city as a whole.
That's pretty spectacular.
Alan Stellmacher with ZGF Architects is the lead designer.
It reflects the neighboring buildings, and so it helps break up the monolithic kind of core of downtown.
He calls it a chameleon, which can blend in when it wants to and still make an impression from afar.
If the building were a person, who would it be?
A photo of Audrey Hepburn actually inspired the building's slinking silhouette.
In the 40 years I've lived here, I've never seen this pace of development. And it's palpable. You can feel it.
Mark Hinshaw is an architect and critic who's been writing about Seattle's skyline for nearly 30 years.
It's not trying to show off like some cities do. They seem to be grasping for some distinctive, one-of-a-kind, iconic structure. We have a kind of a collective idea here of creating a whole, not a bunch of individual parts.
It's a critical aspect of the downtown review.
Lisa Rutzik is Seattle's Design Review Program Manager. Her office sorts through a blitz of building proposals and makes sure they fall within the city's design guidelines, which specifically state that a downtown project should enhance the skyline. Architects should consider how a structure looks from all angles as people are driving into downtown or sailing in on a ferry.
I think we are all often very excited to see those bold, creative designs, but we still want to make sure that they are responsive to the context and work well with the street level.
Planners like to see a tower that tapers as it gets higher. They're looking for unique patterns, textures, and colors. Rutzik says they're seeing a lot more of that these days, in part because Seattle's attracting attention from out-of-town architecture firms eager to make an impression in one of the country's fastest-growing big cities.
We've been incredibly busy. We're at volume records of permits.
There are some duds and there are some disappointments, but I think as a whole, there still is a pretty fine kind of collection of buildings that are being assembled here.
And there are plenty more on the way. Here are just a few of the designs currently in the works.
The others just look like boxes to me.
For onlookers like Isaac, it can feel a bit dizzying, but it's hard to complain when you're taking in the view.
Yeah, you picked a perfect day today.
And we may take this for granted in Seattle, but when you look up at the skyline, you don't see any big company names or logos at the tops of those buildings. You see that in some other cities. Seattle does not do that, and that too is by design. After hours, this transforms into a much different skyline as developers and building owners try all kinds of interesting lighting to really make an impression on the skyline. That too is something that city planners pay very close attention to. They don't want the skyline to be too bright or anything to stick out too much. We'll explain a little bit more about that process in a story on King 5 News at 10. Live in Seattle, Ted Land, King 5 News.